Hey everyone, Dr. Steve here. You know it as well as I do, but most students need a B or better in A&P. But did you know that students are doing that all over the US using my Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite as a low-cost alternative to expensive textbooks? Digital Suite delivers the key concepts of A&P with short, assignable tutor videos and a bulleted narrative study guide that not only explain the concepts of A&P, they show them happening. Combined with state-of-the-art dissection and physiology lab simulations and a vast question bank for quizzes, homework assignments, and exams, Digital Suite meets students where they are and gives them the tools to master the content. It's the perfect supplement to an OER textbook or just on its own. If you're an A&P instructor, contact your McGraw-Hill representative today and ask about Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite. If you're a student, tell your instructor about it. There's a link to Digital Suite in the show notes of this episode. Get your B or better in A&P with A&P Digital Suite.
The best part of holiday gifting? Giving them something they'll use all year. During December deal drops at Lowe's, save $40 on select Craftsman V20 tools, now just $59. Plus, all rewards members get free standard shipping. Shop new December deal drops every week this month. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 12/10. While supplies last. Free shipping excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Exclusions and more terms apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Subject to change. Visit Lowe's.com/shipping terms for details.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubric Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubric.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Hi everybody, Dr. Sullivan here. You're about to listen to episode 1 of my podcast Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit, which I recorded back in 2019. As you'll notice, the episodes will progress along topics much like a typical college anatomy and physiology course. So I really hope that it helps you and you enjoy the podcast moving forward. Throughout the show, you'll hear me mention something called Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, which is published by McGraw-Hill Education. I'm the author of this set of learning resources for anatomy and physiology, which include almost 200 tutor videos I've made over the years. This is something that instructors assign to students. So even though you'll be able to find it online and you'll be able to actually purchase it if you wanted to, I don't recommend you do that. Professors have to adopt Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite and then use it in their course and assign it to their students. It's not something that students can just use standalone. What I do recommend, however, is that you go to your podcast app and run through all of the episodes that I have and download them all now. This way, you will have the entire course of content ready to go on your phone no matter where you are. As of recording this show has an average rating of 4.9 to 5 on Apple Podcasts, and I've gotten several reviews and comments on Spotify and Apple from listeners telling me how much this show has helped them in their A&P course. So that is my recommendation to you. And if you feel that something like Digital Suite could be helpful, please tell your professor about it. And you can tell your professor and your classmates and your friends about this podcast. Thanks again for finding this show. Since I started it back in 2019, FeedSpot and Million Podcasts have called it the #1 anatomy and physiology podcast on the internet. And Spotify has ranked this podcast number 16 among all education podcasts in the United States. So I hope this helps you get your B or better in A&P. Good luck, and here comes episode 1. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 1 of Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Sullivan, coming to you from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I've been teaching A&P since 2002 at Bucks County Community College. This is the very first episode of my new podcast, and I'm really excited to be doing this. I love A&P, I love teaching A&P, and I love the field of healthcare. If you're an A&P student, human biology student, future or current healthcare practitioner, or just someone interested in the human body and how it works, you're in the right place. I really want to reach out to as many people as possible and help students pass A&P. I mean, that's the goal here, right? Well, actually, come to think of it, passing isn't enough for most students. Most professional schools require a B or better, and that's the real goal. The plan for the show is this. Cover A&P like it's a typical college course that you're taking for nursing, radiology, occupational therapy, sonography, etc. I'll start with what's covered in the beginning of a typical 2-semester A&P textbook and move forward from there. That means we begin with body organization and some terminology just to get things going. The episodes are not going to be all the same length. I'll let the content dictate that, so bear with me as we go. So I think we should start off with what anatomy and physiology actually is, right? So here's a course that is 2 separate topics combined into one course. And full disclosure, as a student, I've never taken an anatomy and physiology course. I've always taken anatomy courses and physiology courses separately. So we'll first discuss the difference between anatomy and physiology after I give you a little bit of background about me. I am an American, and I live in the United States. I'm originally from central New Jersey, much closer to New York than to Philadelphia. I was born and raised there in central New Jersey. I lived in New York for a little while, a few years, and now I live in Pennsylvania, where I've been since 1999. I actually live not far from Philadelphia now. I lived in the city of Philadelphia for about 3 or 4 years as well. After high school, I went to Rutgers University, and I studied exercise science and sports studies with a focus on exercise physiology. That major was pretty interesting back in 1990. It doesn't really exist like that anymore, but back then, you could take one of 3 different tracks in exercise science, which they called options. One was sports management, which was kind of like a business track. One was physical education, which was teaching, and the other was physiology. I chose the physiology option. After graduating from college, I moved to the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York and attended what is today known as the Northeast College of Health Sciences. I graduated from there in 1999 with a Doctor of Chiropractic degree. I practiced as a chiropractor for a few years, focusing on musculoskeletal injuries. I worked with a semi-professional American football team in Philadelphia, treating sports injuries within my scope of practice. About 3 years into practicing, I started teaching anatomy and physiology at the local community college in my county in Pennsylvania. I did that for a few years part-time as an adjunct professor, and I really loved it. I took on as many sections as they would let me take, kept teaching the course, and eventually they hired me as a full-time tenure-track professor in 2005, and that is where I remain. In 2007, I gave up practicing altogether, which quite honestly wasn't really for me anyway, and I am currently a tenured, full professor at Bucks County Community College in Newtown, Pennsylvania. So I've been teaching this course for quite a while. I've been using a lot of technology in this course since about 2005, when I began teaching A&P as a hybrid course, meaning the labs met in person, but all the lecture content was online. I've traveled around the country helping other instructors with educational technology as well. I actually taught a course for a few years in Bangkok, Thailand, helping K-12 teachers implement technology into their classrooms for the College of New Jersey. I do a lot of webinars. I've been to about 42 of the 50 states in the United States. In fact, right now, I'm actually in a hotel room in Lexington, Kentucky, about to head off to help a local college here start using more technology in their anatomy and physiology courses. This is a lot of what I do. I embrace the technology and its ability to help teach A&P and to learn A&P. Since 2009, I've worked as a digital faculty consultant and author for McGraw-Hill Education. I've contributed digital content to existing textbooks, and I also am the author of a digital courseware system called Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite. It's a system that uses tutor videos that I make to deliver content rather than a traditional printed textbook. There's other materials that come with that, like lab simulations, question banks to make homework assignments and exams, And there's a bulleted narrative study guide that is made from the tutor videos by my good friend Dr. Beth Kirsten down in Florida. She's also an amazing anatomy and physiology professor. Okay, enough about me. Let's move on with the content. Think about the way the human body is organized. Usually a typical A&P course for nursing students, pre-physical therapy students, biomedical sciences, radiography, sonography, physician assistant, etc., is what's considered a majors level 2-semester A&P course. Those courses are typically organized from small to big, meaning that after talking about body organization and terminology, we cover the human body from atoms all the way up to the whole organism. That's typically how the textbooks are laid out chapter by chapter. Chapter 2 is usually chemistry, and then 3 is cells, and then we go to tissues, and we get into organ systems. So that's how I'm going to handle the podcast. I'm going to cover A&P in the same order that a student is taking it. We will begin today with body organization and terminology. So let's start with organization. When we consider the human body, there is a hierarchy of organization. If we took our bodies down to the very smallest parts, of course we would find atoms. Remember that classic joke? Why should you never trust anything an atom tells you? Well, because atoms make up everything. Classic joke, I think my 5th grader knows that joke, but it's true. Atoms make up everything, including humans. Atoms comprise elements like oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sodium, potassium. These are all parts of our bodies. You've heard of iron, calcium. All of those things are elements made up of atoms and are required for life. Oh, and I forgot to even mention carbon. Of course, we're carbon-based life forms. So, all of those things are made of atoms. For our purposes here, atoms are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and neutrons in the nucleus, and electrons surrounding the nucleus in clouds or shells. The protons are positively charged, the electrons are negatively charged, and the neutrons have no charge. And atoms have the same number of protons in their nucleus as electrons organized in clouds surrounding the nucleus, meaning an atom has a net charge of 0. And it's the number of protons that determine the identity of the element. For example, sodium has 11 protons, and it has 11 electrons. Hydrogen has 1 proton and 1 electron. Sometimes the number of electrons changes. An electron or 2 is gained or lost. This converts the atom to an ion, which is charged. Sodium often loses an electron, making it a sodium ion with a charge of +1. Potassium does the same. Calcium loses 2 electrons, giving an ion of calcium a charge of +2. Chlorine gains an electron, forming the ion chloride with a charge of -1. Sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium ions, hydrogen ions, chloride ions. These ions, among many, many, many others, are essential to the function of our body. These charged particles are used for nerve signals, muscle contraction, and countless other processes. Ions and atoms come together to form the next level of organization, the molecular level. They form molecules. Molecules are the next highest level of organization. They're larger and more complex than atoms. What is our body mostly made of? Water, right? Water is a molecule. H2O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. That's a molecule. Larger molecules would be things like glucose, C6H12O6, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. You have lots of molecules of glucose coursing through your blood, which is something that we utilize to synthesize ATP so that we can use energy in our body so our cells can do work. That's another molecule, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So molecules can get even bigger, and we call them macromolecules like RNA, DNA, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids. These are all macromolecules that we utilize in our metabolism. And if we think of proteins, for example, proteins are going to be a huge part of what we're going to learn about in the human body. Because proteins not only make up the contractile components of your muscles so that your muscles can move, but they also make up a big bulk of your hormones, your neurotransmitters, the enzymes that help you catalyze chemical reactions in your bodies or break down food that you consume. Those things are all protein-based. And we have to synthesize those proteins out of their smaller building block structures called amino acids. In fact, the primary thing that makes one protein different from another is which amino acids are in the protein's molecule, how many of them there are, and what order they're in. Not to mention the three-dimensional shape that they take up when they're fully formed. All right, so those are proteins. We also use carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a good energy source for us. We consume them, we break them down into glucose, and we utilize those to make ATP, which is our energy currency. We have carbohydrates that are attached to proteins called glycoproteins. We have carbohydrates that are attached to lipids, glycolipids. We have carbohydrates that form our cell identity markers, so that way your immune system knows which cells are you and which cells are not you, so it doesn't attack your own cells, which ultimately would be an autoimmune disease. Auto meaning self, like an autobiography is written by the person who it's about. Next, those macromolecules all come together to form the smaller pieces inside a cell who each have a very specific job. And we call those organelles. Organelles are the beginning of the cellular level of hierarchy. Examples of organelles are mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, Golgi complex, lysosomes, peroxisomes. These are all called organelles, and they each do a specific job inside a cell. For example, mitochondria synthesize ATP. They convert the energy in glucose to a molecule of ATP so that we can utilize it for our cells to do work. Energy is required for work to be done, and that's no different in our cells. And since energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed, it has to be converted. So avoid the temptation to say mitochondria make energy. Nothing makes energy. Mitochondria simply convert the energy in a molecule of glucose to a molecule of ATP, which is the form with which our cells utilize energy. There are a lot of different organelles, and we're going to cover all of them in a future episode. Those organelles are surrounded by a plasma membrane and work together with a nucleus filled with our genetic material to form what's called a cell. That is the next level of organization, the cellular level, and it is the simplest component of life that is still considered to be alive. Inside the cell is a watery fluid called cytosol, and combined with the organelles, they comprise what's called the cytoplasm. And like I said before, they're wrapped, in animals at least, by a plasma membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer with lots and lots of proteins dispersed throughout it. It's not a cell wall. Animals, including humans, do not have a cell wall. Plants have a cell wall made of carbohydrate starch called cellulose. Again, we have what's called a plasma membrane, and that plasma membrane is where we find a lot of those proteins I was talking about earlier. They would be receptors, channel proteins so that ions can move in and out of our cells, enzymes to catalyze chemical reactions, cell adhesion molecules to bind cells to one another, and others. Yeah, lots of different things. We'll talk more about that in later episodes. One cell can perform several functions, but it's only one cell. Typically, what one cell can do isn't enough to get the whole job done. So when like cells all come together, they form the next level of organization, which is the tissue level. Like cells come together to form tissues. A big group of cells performing their functions at the same time in the same place, which can amplify their function so it's enough to do the job the body needs them to be doing. Imagine you're a professional athlete playing a sport in a stadium, and there's one person sitting somewhere in the stadium, and that person claps for you. You might not even hear it, depending on where you are in the field, but if 30,000 people are in that stadium and they're all clapping, the sound amplifies and it can be almost deafening. That's what tissues do. So a cell has a job to do. It performs a function all by itself. When you put that cell with many, many, many other cells that are like it, all doing the same job, you can very much amplify that effect. We are estimated to have 50 trillion cells in our bodies. There is no stadium that holds 50 trillion people. In fact, that's over 6,000 times the number of people on the entire planet. There are 4 main tissue types: epithelium, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. And we will talk more about those specifically another time. These tissues come together to form organs. So when you have a tissue that has a particular job, let's put that together with another tissue that has a particular job so that they can both perform their jobs in one unit. And that unit is called an organ, like the stomach. It can do multiple things. The stomach doesn't just hold on to your food until it's ready to go to your small intestine. It mixes it and churns it. It secretes digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid. It absorbs a few nutrients. It secretes hormones. It does lots of things. It's an organ. Other examples of organs are the heart, lungs, kidneys, brain, liver, pancreas, etc. Now, these organs will combine their efforts with other organs to perform a large number of functions as an organ system, the next level of organization, the system level. For example, the esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, liver, pancreas, gallbladder, all of those work together as the digestive system. That's an organ system. They all perform all of their different jobs together in a collaborative environment. Other examples of organ systems are respiratory, cardiovascular, nervous, endocrine, urinary, reproductive, lymphatic and immune, musculoskeletal, and integumentary. These are all organ systems that we will be looking at in many, many episodes of this podcast in a lot of detail. And then finally, when all of those organ systems come together so that we can live in our environment, we have an organism. And that's us. The organism level of organization. We're organisms. We're human organisms. We're animals, just like dogs and cats, just like coral and sponges, and the organism is the highest level of organization.
The best part of holiday gifting? Giving them something they'll use all year. During December deal drops at Lowe's, save $40 on select Craftsman V20 tools, now just $59. Plus, all rewards members get free standard shipping. Shop new December deal drops every week this month. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 12/10. While supplies last. Free shipping excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Exclusions and more terms apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Subject to change. Visit lowes.com/shipping terms for details.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Now, when we think about anatomy, we think about what are the parts of this organism? What do they look like? What are they called? And where are they? That's what anatomy is. What does it look like? Where is it? What's it called? Anatomy is the study of structure. But then we also need to understand how these structures do what they do. That's physiology. What does it do? And how does it do it? Physiology is the function. So we have anatomy, the structure, and physiology, the function. You may have heard the phrase structure dictates function. That's a common theme that you'll see throughout anatomy and physiology. Not everyone really likes to simplify it that way, but I think it's pretty decent. The kidneys can do what they do because the structure of the kidneys allows it. You can apply that to everyday life. If a wheel wasn't round, it wouldn't roll. If a table didn't have legs, it wouldn't stand. Now, you can make a case that humans built those things and let the function they wanted dictate the structure they needed to build. Okay, that's fine. I get it. But humans and other species are the other way around. Our structure arose out of mutations in our DNA, and based on their functions in our environment, they were naturally selected to persist in the species. So the reason why it's important to understand the structure dictating function is that because if you know the anatomy really well, you'll usually be able to figure out the function. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. Structure dictates function. A common theme that's going to apply quite frequently throughout this course. Okay, so now we have the difference between anatomy and physiology. Once again, I like to say that anatomy answers the questions, where is it, what does it look like, and what is it called? Physiology answers the questions, what does it do, and how does it do it? But in order to really talk about those things, we have to understand the language of anatomy. So now we're going to talk about anatomical terminology. When you take an anatomy course, you're really learning a new language. Anatomical terminology is a shared vocabulary that lets you describe the body precisely so that phrases like the small lump on the left side of the neck becomes phrases like a palpable mass in the left lateral cervical region. The whole point is to eliminate ambiguity. So instead of saying above, below, in front of, to the side, we use standardized terms like superior to, inferior to, anterior, lateral. And they mean exactly the same thing to every clinician on every patient every time. So let's walk through this language of location, starting with the anatomical position. Then we'll talk about directional terms, body planes, and finally regional terminology for different parts of the body. So we have a reference pose for the body that we call anatomical position. All of anatomical terminology assumes that the body is in this standard pose. Imagine a person standing upright, facing forward, feet flat on the floor and slightly apart, arms at the sides with the palms facing forward and the thumbs pointing away from the body. The head is level, the eyes are looking straight ahead. That is anatomical position. This posture matters because many of our terms like anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral depend on a consistent frame of reference. Even if the patient is lying down, curled up, or turned sideways, we still describe their body parts as if they're in anatomical position. That way, phrases like the anterior surface of the forearm mean the same thing whether the arm is flexed or extended, supinated, or pronated. So then we need terms to tell us where, right? So where is it? That's a big part of anatomy. So we need what we call directional terms, a precise way to say where something is. Once the anatomical position is set, directional terms let us specify the location of one structure relative to another. And each term is going to have a partner. They'll work in pairs, like coordinates. We'll start with superior and inferior. Superior means toward the head or above. Inferior means toward the feet or below. So, for example, the heart is superior to the stomach, but inferior to the larynx of your throat. These terms are especially useful along the midline of your body, like the pelvis, abdomen, torso, spine, and skull. Now, we do have synonyms for these. Often people will use cephalad as superior because cephalad means toward the head. Or they'll use caudal for inferior because caudal means toward the tail. So we can think of our tailbone because we don't really use superior and inferior for the limbs, like the hips and lower limbs and the pectoral girdles and upper limbs or shoulders and upper limbs. We don't typically use superior and inferior for those. We use different terms. So we can use caudal as inferior. The next ones are anterior and posterior. Now, another name for anterior is ventral, and another name for posterior is dorsal. You'll probably see them used interchangeably pretty evenly across the board. Anterior and ventral mean toward the front of the body. Posterior and dorsal mean toward the back of the body. Examples would be in humans, the sternum or breastbone is anterior to the heart. The vertebral column or spine is posterior to the heart. Now, in quadrupeds, animals on four legs like sheep and dogs, the orientation is a little different. So it's useful to try to think in 3 dimensions and across species. You may be dissecting animal specimens in your anatomy class, which means the terminology might change a little bit. Okay, these 3 terms are interesting too: medial, lateral, and intermediate. Medial means toward the midline of the body, whereas lateral means away from the midline. Intermediate means between 2 structures. So, for example, the nose is medial to the eyes, but the ears are lateral to the eyes. The clavicle or collarbone is intermediate between the sternum and the shoulder. Or we could say the spine is intermediate between the shoulder blades, which are called the scapulae. Now, for limbs, we use proximal and distal. Proximal means closer to the point of attachment. Distal means farther from the point of attachment. So if we think about the upper limb, which colloquially you've probably been saying arm. It's not arm, it's shoulder and upper limb. The elbow is proximal to the wrist, but distal to the shoulder, because proximal means closer to the attachment site of the limb, which would be the shoulder. So compared to the wrist, the elbow is proximal, but compared to the shoulder, it's distal. Think of the words proximity and distance. Proximal means closer, like proximity. Distal means further, like distant. A student who says the fingers are below the elbow is being too vague. The better way to say that is the phalanges are distal to the elbow. That's anatomically precise. We also use proximal and distal for the digestive tract, where proximal is toward the beginning of the tract, which is the mouth, and distal is toward the end of the tract, which is the anus. And beginning and end basically follows the direction that contents are moving through that tract. And it's only the digestive tract that we're really using it. We also need terms that describe the depth relative to the body's surface. Superficial means closer to the surface, and deep means farther from the surface. So the skin is superficial to bones. Bones are deep to the skin. A superficial cut might involve only the epidermis, which is your superficial layer of your skin, and the dermis, the slightly deeper layer. But a deep laceration could extend into muscle or even reach the bone. Ipsilateral and contralateral help describing relationships across sides of the body. Ipsilateral means on the same side, whereas contralateral means on the opposite side. A patient might have ipsilateral weakness of the right arm and right leg after a stroke, or contralateral sensory deficits if a lesion is on one side of the brain but the symptoms appear on the other side. Okay, that's good enough for terminology, but we also need to consider how we examine the body in terms of how we cut it to look inside. And for that, we need to reference the three-dimensional orientation of our bodies by using body planes. Imagine slicing the body with flat surfaces, and we call those planes. These are crucial for understanding imaging modalities like CT and MRI, as well as for describing how we section organs for study if we're dissecting. So let's start with the sagittal planes. The sagittal plane divides the body into left and right portions. A mid-sagittal plane runs exactly through the midline, creating equal left and right halves of the body. But a parasagittal plane can be anywhere off-center, and that will divide the body into unequal left and right portions. For example, a mid-sagittal section of the head would pass through the sternum and the middle of the brain. A parasagittal section would miss the midline and show asymmetric portions of the body. A frontal or coronal plane divides the body into anterior and posterior portions. If you imagine making a slice in which the blade goes through both ears simultaneously, that is the coronal plane. In brain imaging, coronal sections are a standard way to view the internal structures. The coronal plane can be at any points from anterior to posterior. We don't have to worry about a mid-coronal plane. Anything that divides you into anterior and posterior sections is the coronal plane. We also have the transverse plane, which cuts the body into superior and inferior parts. CT and MRI scans are often viewed as a series of transverse slices moving from head down toward the feet or vice versa. In clinical imaging reports, you'll hear phrases like, in the axial plane, referring to these transverse sections. They're often also called cross sections. And then finally, we have oblique planes, because not every useful section is neatly sagittal, frontal, or transverse. An oblique plane cuts at an angle between the major planes. For instance, an oblique section through a joint can reveal structures that are hard to interpret in strictly orthogonal planes. Understanding these planes and consistently imagining which parts of the body end up in which slice is key to interpreting advanced imaging techniques like X-ray, MRI, and CT scans. Okay, we also need to talk about the anatomical terms for regions of the body. Colloquially and with layman's terms, you've probably used things like arm, leg, elbow, things like that. And some of those are going to be fine some of the time. But we do have specific, precise anatomical regions that we're going to talk about. So first off, the body is broadly divided into axial and appendicular regions. And then we break those down into even smaller, named areas. The axial region consists of the head, neck, and trunk. It's right down the long axis of the body. The head is known as the cephalic region, and it includes several subregions, like the cranial portion, which is the part surrounding your brain, the facial region, the eyes, nose, mouth, cheeks, and jaw, and within the face we can identify the orbital, nasal, oral, buccal, and mental regions. Orbital for eye, nasal for nose, oral for mouth, buccal for cheek, and mental for your chin. Clinically, you might say periorbital edema instead of swelling around the eye, or mental nerve to describe a nerve serving the chin area. The neck is also known as the cervical region. It connects the head to the trunk. It contains critical structures like the cervical vertebrae, major blood vessels, the trachea, which is your windpipe, the esophagus, which brings food down to your stomach, and the thyroid gland. Terms like anterior cervical lymph nodes pinpoint specific clusters of lymph nodes in front of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which attaches to the sternum, clavicle, and the mastoid process of your skull. The trunk is also known as the torso. It includes the thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic regions. The thoracic region, which has a large cavity inside, which we often call our chest, houses the heart and lungs. Within it, we use terms like sternal, the region over the sternum, your breastbone, pectoral, the region around your chest muscles, mammary for breasts, and axillary for the armpit. The abdominal region lies below the diaphragm, the muscle you breathe with, but above the pelvis. To locate organs or describe pain in the abdominal region, we often divide it into quadrants like right upper, right lower, and left lower quadrants. The pelvic region lies inferior to the abdominal cavity and contains parts of the large intestine, urinary bladder, and internal reproductive organs. Posteriorly, the sacral area overlies the sacrum, which is kind of the big, bulky part of your tailbone area, and the gluteal regions correspond to the buttocks. These regional names let you say, for example, tenderness in the right lower quadrant, and immediately suggest structures like the appendix, the cecum, which is the beginning of your large intestine, or the right ovary. The appendicular region includes the upper and lower limbs, along with their girdles, the shoulder and pelvic girdles. Upper limb regions are described using both common and anatomical regional terms. Acromial is the point. The acromial region is the tip of the shoulder. It's called that because there's a structure on your shoulder blade or scapula called the acromion. Brachial refers to the arm, the upper arm, really the humerus area, from shoulder to elbow. The cubital region is the elbow itself, and the anterior surface of the elbow is called the antecubital region. This is often the place where they will take blood from. Antebrachial refers to the forearm, which is from the elbow to the wrist. The carpal region is the wrist itself. The manual region is the hand, which includes both the palm or palmar region, as well as the digital or phalangeal regions, which is your fingers. So if a patient has pain in the front of the elbow, you can document tenderness in the right antecubital region, which is more precise and more reproducible. In the lower limb, we have the coxal region, which is your hip, the femoral region, which is your thigh from hip to knee, the patellar region, which is the anterior knee, and the popliteal region, which refers to the posterior knee, the crural region, which is the lower leg from knee to ankle, the fibular, which is the lateral part of the lower leg. We also call that peroneal. The ankle is called the tarsal region, and the foot is called the pedal region, which includes the dorsum, the top of the foot, and the plantar surface, the bottom of your foot. And we also have digital and phalangeal regions for the toes. In clinical documentation, you might say ecchymosis over the lateral malleolar region rather than a bruise on the outside of the ankle, linking directly to bony landmarks and reducing ambiguity. Because when you get down to your ankle and you can feel the hard bone on both sides of your ankle, each one of those is called a malleolus. There's a medial malleolus on the inside, that's part of your tibia, and a lateral malleolus on the outside, that's part of the fibula. Okay, so let's pull it all together. The real power of anatomical terminology appears when you combine these systems, directional terms, planes, and regions, to describe exam findings, injuries, or surgical approaches. For instance, consider describing a laceration. You can say a 3 centimeter superficial laceration in the left lateral cervical region, just inferior to the angle of the mandible. All in one sentence, you've conveyed what side it's on, how deep it is, what region it's in, the orientation, how far medial or lateral, and the relationship to a specific landmark. Or in an imaging report, you might see something like on a transverse CT section at the level of T4, that's the thoracic vertebra number 4, a mass is seen anterior to the vertebral body and posterior to the sternum in the superior mediastinum. The mediastinum is a space between your lungs in the thoracic cavity. This description uses planes, levels, directional terms, and regional anatomy to precisely locate a pathology. When you are studying anatomy, try to think in layers. First, which region? Cervical, thoracic, femoral. Then, relative to what? Superior, inferior, medial, lateral, proximal, distal. And in which plane? Sagittal, frontal, transverse, oblique. By repeatedly translating everyday phrases into anatomical language, pain on the outside of the knee becomes lateral aspect of the right knee near the fibular head. Eventually, you will gradually internalize the terminology as this vocabulary stops feeling like jargon and becomes the natural way that you conceptualize the human body. Don't think of anatomical terminology as just a list of terms to memorize. It's a structured, logical language that maps the three-dimensional human form into words. Once you master this, it's going to allow clear, efficient communication in the classroom, in the clinic, the hospital, the imaging center, the operating room, in any healthcare setting. Using the proper terminology ensures that when we describe the body, everyone is literally on the same page and, quite honestly, on the same plane.
Getting more as a MyLowe's Pro Rewards member is easier than ever with the Lowe's app. Download it today and earn 500 points the first time you log in. Plus, your digital wallet helps you scan, save, earn, and access what you need to manage it all in one place. Download the Lowe's app and take advantage of your Pro benefits today. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid 12/1/25 through 1/7/26. Offer valid for first login per organization only. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Additional restrictions apply. Visit Lowe's.com/terms for more details. Subject to change.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
All right, I think that's enough for episode 1. I can't thank you enough for listening, and I hope you continue to listen to these episodes because I plan to make a ton of them to cover this entire course. So please subscribe or follow, and if you've got the time, it only takes a minute, I'd really appreciate a rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're using. I hope this podcast helps you get your B or better in A&P. Good luck, and I'll talk to you next time. Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit is a production of Minus 55 Media and is hosted by the Believe Network. Please take the time to rate the podcast and leave a review. You can also check out the content I post on Instagram and YouTube as @StudentHelp4AP. That's StudentHelp, the number 4, AP. Special thanks to my family, Bucks County Community College, and McGraw-Hill Education, where your instructor can find Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, my low-cost, tutor video-based digital learning solution for anatomy and physiology, currently being used at several colleges and universities. If your instructor isn't using Digital Suite, let them know about it. The link is in the show notes.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Happy holidays! Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy Holiday. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.